50 million years ago, in what is now Pakistan, a creature stood at the edge of possibility. It was no larger than a wolf, this animal we now call Pakicetus, with 4 sturdy legs and a long snout filled with teeth designed for catching fish. And on one particular morning, perhaps driven by hunger or curiosity or some evolutionary imperative we cannot name, it stepped into shallow coastal waters and began to hunt. Before we continue this journey, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extraordinary for you. That single moment, unremarkable to any observer who might have witnessed it, set in motion the most extraordinary transformation in the history of life on Earth. Because that creature, wading through river deltas, would become the ancestor of the largest animals ever to exist, not in 10 years or 100, but across 10 million years of patient, relentless change. Legs that once carried weight on land gradually shortened, reshaped, became flippers. Nostrils that drew air at the tip of a snout migrated backward across the skull, month by month, generation by generation, until they opened at the crown of the head as blowholes. A tail that once helped balance a terrestrial hunter flattened horizontally, developed flukes, became an engine powerful enough to drive 100 tons through water. Consider for a moment what this means. The largest creature you have ever seen, the blue whale, stretching 100 feet from rostrum to tail, weighing as much as 30 elephants descended from something you could hold in your arms. Evolution found a way to turn a land mammal into a giant, not by sudden miracle but through countless small adjustments accumulated across millions of generations, each one tested against the unforgiving mathematics of survival. For the longest time, we didn't know any of this. Whales seemed to appear in the fossil record fully formed, as if the ocean had simply dreamed them into existence. Charles Darwin himself worried about this mystery. Here were mammals perfectly adapted to marine life, yet the transitional forms to the fossils that would show the journey from land to sea remained hidden. It was a gap in understanding, a missing chapter that seemed to support those who doubted evolution itself. Then, in the scorching summer of 1983, a paleontologist named Philip Gingerich was excavating in the Egyptian desert, sifting through sediments that were once the floor of the Tethys Sea. He uncovered something extraordinary: the skeleton of Basilosaurus, a creature that lived 34 million years ago. 60 feet long, serpentine in form, it was clearly a whale. But when Gingerich's team carefully removed the surrounding rock, they found something that shouldn't exist. There, embedded in the skeleton, were tiny hind legs, fully formed but utterly useless, no longer than a human arm, remnants of a terrestrial past that the animal no longer needed, but evolution had not yet completely erased. Here was proof, written in bone. Whales once walked, and if they once walked, then somewhere in deep time they had made the transition from land to sea, just as Darwin had predicted. The discovery changed everything. Within years, paleontologists began finding the intermediate forms: Ambulocetus, the walking whale with webbed feet; Rhodhocetus, with shortened legs and a powerful tail; Dorudon, nearly modern in form but still carrying vestigial femurs, each fossil a frame in the longest transformation sequence ever documented, a 10-million-year film showing how a wolf became a leviathan. But bones can only tell us so much. To understand why whales became giants, we must understand the ocean itself, the medium that makes their existence possible. Water is 800 times denser than air. This changes everything. On land, an animal's size is limited by the strength of its skeleton, the power of its muscles to fight gravity with every movement. Elephants, the largest land animals, weigh perhaps 6 tons. Make them much bigger, and their legs would shatter under their own mass. In water, however, bodies are supported by the fluid itself. A whale weighs nothing in its own environment, Freed from gravity's constraint, evolution could experiment with size in ways impossible on land. Blue whales reached 190 tons, larger than any dinosaur, larger than anything that has ever lived. Their hearts weigh 1,300 pounds, the size of a small car, beating 5 times per minute when they dive. Their tongues weigh as much as elephants. Their arteries are wide enough for a human child to swim through. This scale isn't merely impressive, it's strategic. Large bodies lose heat more slowly than small ones, crucial for mammals maintaining warm blood in cold oceans. Size provides momentum that makes long migrations energetically efficient. A blue whale can glide for miles on a single tailstroke, and size offers protection. Only the largest orcas dare attack an adult fin whale, and nothing hunts healthy blue whales except humans with technology. Yet becoming large was only part of the revolution. Each whale species evolved to exploit a different layer of the ocean, a different food source, a different acoustic niche. Sperm whales, diving deeper than any other mammal, developed the most sophisticated biological sonar on Earth. They hunt in absolute darkness, 2,000 feet down where no sunlight penetrates, where pressure would crush human lungs like paper bags. Their clicks produced in an organ called the spermaceti, filled with oil that focuses sound like a lens, focuses light to the loudest sounds made by any animal. 180 decibels, louder than rocket launches, focused beams of sound that can stun a giant squid into paralysis from 30 feet away. Blue whales took a different path. They became filter, feeders, evolving throats pleated like accordions, capable of expanding to engulf volumes of water equivalent to their entire body mass. Watch a blue whale lunge feed and you witness physics at its most extreme. The animal accelerates toward a krill swarm, then opens its mouth and inverts the process, going from 8 miles per hour to nearly 0 in seconds as thousands of gallons pour in. The deceleration force rivals a car crash. Yet they do this dozens of times each day during feeding season, consuming 4 tons of krill daily, 8,000 pounds of tiny crustaceans that must be filtered from swimming pools of seawater. Humpback whales developed perhaps the most remarkable hunting technique of all: bubble net feeding. Groups of whales coordinate in ways that still astound researchers. They dive beneath schools of fish or krill, then swim in rising spirals, exhaling curtains of bubbles that form cylindrical nets no prey can penetrate. The bubbles rise, the net tightens, and the whales surge upward through the center with mouths agape, engulfing the concentrated mass. It requires precision, it requires timing, it requires communication among multiple individuals moving through 3-dimensional space in perfect coordination. It is, in every meaningful sense, cooperative hunting, planned and executed by minds sophisticated enough to imagine the trap before springing it. And then there are their songs. In 1967, a scientist named Roger Payne was listening through hydrophones, underwater microphones positioned off Bermuda. He was searching for whale sounds, hoping to learn something about their behavior. What he heard stopped him completely. These weren't random noises or simple calls. They were organized sequences, repeated patterns, phrases that returned like verses in human music. They had structure, they had rhythm, they had what could only be called syntax. Payne spent months analyzing these recordings, confirming what seemed impossible. Humpback whales were composing songs. Not simple calls, but extended performances lasting up to 30 minutes, with recognizable themes, variations, and rhyme schemes. Males sang these compositions during breeding season, elaborate displays that served the same function as birdsong, attracting mates, perhaps establishing territory, but the complexity was unprecedented. No animal besides humans created anything this intricate, this clearly musical. When Payne released Songs of the Humpback Whale as a record album in 1970, it became a sensation. Whale songs played on radio stations between rock ballads. They appeared on television specials. For the first time, millions of people heard what the ocean had been hiding. Conversations older than human language. Compositions that suggested whales weren't just large animals, but conscious beings with interior lives, perhaps as rich as our own. This realization transformed everything. Scientists began asking different questions. Not just how whales survive, but how they think, how they remember, whether they love, whether they grieve, whether they possess something like culture that passes between generations, not through genes, but through teaching and imitation. And the more we looked, the more we found. Orca's killer whales have dialects so distinct that populations separated by hundreds of miles cannot understand each other's calls, languages that have diverged over thousands of years like human tongues. Sperm whales have codas, rhythmic click patterns unique to each clan. Grandmother whales teaching great-grandcalves the family dialect. Some populations have been found to use specific click signatures, individual names that whales answer to, maintained consistently across 90 years. In the waters off Mexico's Baja Peninsula, grey whale mothers began doing something extraordinary in the 1970s. They started approaching tourist boats, not fleeing, not ignoring, but actively seeking out the vessels. They would surface beside the boats and lift their calves toward humans, allowing people to reach down and touch the babies. This is the same species that whalers once called devilfish for their fierce defense of their young, mothers that would destroy boats and kill crews who threatened their calves. Yet here they were, deliberately bringing their most precious possession within reach of the descendants of their hunters. We don't know why they do this. Perhaps it's curiosity. Perhaps some form of forgiveness. Perhaps, most remarkably, it's teaching mothers showing calves that humans are no longer threats. Cultural knowledge passed from generation to generation, the memory of peace transmitted through demonstration and trust. These are not simple creatures. The brain of a sperm whale weighs 17 pounds, 6 times heavier than ours, with a neocortex more convoluted, suggesting complexity we've barely begun to understand. Orcas have spindle cells, neurons associated with empathy and social processing in greater numbers than any creature, including humans. Humpback whales have been observed protecting seals from orcas, intervening in hunts where they have nothing to gain, suggesting something like altruism operates in minds formed millions of years before our species existed. What swims in our oceans, then, are not merely animals. They are societies, cultures, civilizations that organized themselves while our ancestors were still learning to stand upright. They developed languages while we were mastering fire. They created social structures, matriarchal clans, cooperative hunting groups, grandmother-led families that have persisted for millennia. While human empires rose and fell on shores they swam past, unchanged and unchanging. We are not alone in consciousness on this planet. We never were. We were simply too deaf to hear, too blind to see, too caught in our own importance to recognize that intelligence might speak in frequencies below our hearing, might organize itself in ways that don't build cities or write books, but that are no less sophisticated for their difference. Tomorrow, we will follow those sounds into the depths, tracking songs that circle the entire globe, conversations spanning thousands of miles, an acoustic civilization we only discovered by accident, listening for threats that never came, while missing the greatest story the ocean ever told, that it was never silent, only waiting for us to learn how to listen. The journey has only begun, and what awaits in the darkness ahead will change forever how you understand communication, consciousness, and the hidden depths of minds shaped by pressures we cannot survive and silences we cannot comprehend. In the winter of 1943, naval operators stationed in the Atlantic were listening for German submarines. The war depended on detecting enemy vessels before they could strike, and so young men sat in darkened rooms wearing headphones, straining to catch the mechanical sounds of propellers and engines cutting through deep water. What they heard instead confused them completely. Rhythmic pulses, low-frequency moans, sounds that repeated in patterns, traveling across entire ocean basins, appearing on hydrophones separated by hundreds of miles. The military classified these recordings. Perhaps they were new submarine technology, perhaps coded transmissions. It wasn't until decades later, when researchers finally examined the wartime archives, that the truth emerged. Those operators had accidentally discovered the largest communication network on Earth. The ocean wasn't silent, it was singing, and the songs traveled farther than any human voice ever could. We think of the sea as a barrier to sound, perhaps because we experience it that way. Dunking our heads underwater at the beach, everything becomes muffled, distant. But this is an artifact of the boundary between air and water, the impedance mismatch that reflects sound back rather than letting it pass through. Once you're fully immersed, once the sound originates and travels entirely within the ocean, everything changes. Water is a supreme conductor. Sound moves 5 times faster through seawater than through air, and it travels immensely farther before dissipating. Consider what this means for a whale. When a blue whale produces its long, low-frequency call in the waters off California, that sound doesn't fade after a few miles. It bounces off the ocean floor, refracts through temperature layers, travels through the deep sound channel, a layer of water, where temperature and pressure create acoustic conditions that trap sound waves, forcing them to travel horizontally rather than dispersing upward or downward. In this channel, a blue whale's call can propagate for thousands of miles, literally thousands. A whale singing off the coast of California can be heard by another whale near Kamchatka across the entire North Pacific. This revelation came from a scientist named Christopher Clark, who in the 1990s gained access to SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, a network of underwater listening stations the U.S. Navy built during the Cold War to track Soviet submarines. The arrays were extraordinarily sensitive, positioned strategically across ocean basins. When Clark analyzed the acoustic data, he found whale calls everywhere. Fin whales communicating between Bermuda and Portugal, their conversations spanning 3,000 miles of open ocean. Blue whales calling from Antarctica to the equator. The ocean, it turned out, was crisscrossed with acoustic highways, older than human civilization, communication networks that had operated for millions of years, while we remained entirely ignorant of their existence. But distance is only part of the story. What astounded researchers even more was discovering that these weren't simple calls. They were structured, organized. In many cases, they were songs in the truest sense of the word. Katie Payne, who had worked with her husband Roger on those first humpback recordings, made another breakthrough in the 1980s. She was analyzing whale songs using the same mathematical tools musicologists apply to human compositions, looking for patterns, for structure, for anything that might reveal how whales organized their vocalizations. What she found was extraordinary. Humpback songs follow the same mathematical ratios found in human music. The relationships between phrases, the intervals between sounds, the way themes develop and recur, all of it conformed to patterns we thought were uniquely human inventions. A male humpback song can last 30 minutes. 30 full minutes of organized sound, with distinct themes that appear, develop, transform, and return. These aren't random vocalizations strung together. They're compositions with verses and refrains, with sections that rhyme acoustically, with structures that suggest not just communication, but art. And here's where it becomes almost unbelievable. These songs change. Every year, the songs evolve. Males add new phrases, drop old ones, modify existing themes. The changes spread through populations like musical trends, picked up and adopted by other singers. By the end of a breeding season, All the males in a population are singing essentially the same new song. It's cultural transmission, the passing of learned behavior through social contact rather than genetic inheritance. And it happens on a scale humans didn't achieve until we invented recording technology. A whale in Hawaiian waters creates a new musical phrase. Within months, whales thousands of miles away in Mexico are incorporating that phrase into their own songs. The Pacific Ocean serves as a concert hall where compositions spread at measurable rates approximately 3,000 miles in 2 months, until every male from Japan to Baja is performing the same updated arrangement. Think about what must be happening in the minds that create this. These whales aren't simply repeating memorized calls, they're remembering complex sequences, they're learning new material, they're choosing what to adopt and what to discard. They're engaged in something that looks remarkably like creativity, like musical innovation, like the very things we point to when arguing that humans are special. The mechanics of these vocalizations are equally astounding. Blue whales produce sounds at 188 decibels. To put that in perspective, a jet engine at takeoff measures about 140 decibels. A rock concert might reach 120. Blue whales are producing sounds louder than jet engines, but at frequencies so low most humans can't hear them as sound at all. We feel them. Stand on the deck of a ship when a blue whale vocalizes nearby, and you'll feel the vibration through the hull, through your bones, a physical presence that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. These low frequencies, some dropping below 20 Hz, well below human hearing range, travel the farthest. They're the songs that cross ocean basins, the calls that connect populations separated by thousands of miles. And because water transmits vibration so effectively, these sounds don't just travel, they penetrate. They move through hulls of ships. They resonate in the swim bladders of fish. They shake the substrate of the seafloor itself. The ocean doesn't just carry whale songs, it becomes them, the entire medium vibrating with their presence. Sperm whales took a completely different approach. Instead of long, low songs, they developed coda's rapid click sequences that function like Morse code. Each family clan has its own dialect, its own characteristic rhythm. Researchers working with sperm whales in the Caribbean discovered something remarkable. These codas are maintained across generations. Grandmother whales teach them to their daughters and granddaughters. Families that have been tracked for 40 years still use the same patterns, identifying themselves to other sperm whales through acoustic signatures that have remained stable across human lifetimes. More remarkably still, individual whales have names. Shane Gero, who has studied Caribbean sperm whales for over 15 years, documented whales using specific click patterns when addressing particular individuals. A mother calling her calf from miles away uses the same click signature every time, and that calf responds to that pattern but not to others. These aren't generic contact calls. They're individual identifiers, maintained consistently for 90 years, in some documented cases whales answering to the same acoustic name across their entire lives. This isn't communication in the way we usually think of animal calls. It's language, not in the full human sense perhaps, but closer to it than anything else we've found in nature. There's syntax rules about how clicks can be combined. There's semantics meanings attached to specific patterns. There's cultural transmission dialects passed through learning rather than instinct. There's individual naming, perhaps the clearest marker of sophisticated communication short of abstract thought. And all of this is happening in a medium we can barely access, at scales we can barely comprehend, using senses we don't possess. When sperm whales hunt in the deep ocean, they navigate total darkness, using echolocation so precise they can distinguish between squid species by the density of their flesh. The clicks they produce for hunting are different from their communication. Codas, shorter, more rapid, focused like searchlight beams that scan the darkness ahead. These hunting clicks are the loudest biological sounds ever measured. Focused pulses that can reach 230 decibels at close range, loud enough to vibrate human tissue, potentially harmful to divers who get too close to vocalizing sperm whales. Yet, they control this power with remarkable precision. A mother sperm whale can produce clicks loud enough to stun prey while her calf nurses beside her, the sound directed away from the infant, focused forward into the hunting field. They can adjust intensity, frequency, directionality. Their entire acoustic system operates like a programmable sonar array more sophisticated than anything human engineers have built. The ocean, then, contains conversations we're only beginning to hear. Orcas in Norway discussing which herring school to target, their dialects incomprehensible to orcas in Argentina, who hunt seals from beaches and speak an entirely different acoustic language. Beaked whales in the deep trenches exchanging clicks we've only recorded a handful of times, the species so shy and so deep-dwelling, we know almost nothing about them except that they exist and they vocalize in frequencies we can barely detect. Right whales calling to each other across the North Atlantic, their populations so reduced by whaling that individual whales now swim thousands of miles between encounters with their own kind, singing into vast spaces that once echoed with thousands of voices, now nearly empty. And here's where the story turns heartbreaking, because we didn't just discover these songs, we drowned them out. The ocean soundscape has changed catastrophically in the past century. Ship traffic has increased exponentially. Commercial vessels produce low-frequency engine noise that occupies the same acoustic space as whale songs. Military sonar exercises pump sound into the ocean at intensities that can damage whale hearing, cause strandings, force populations away from feeding grounds. Seismic surveys for oil and gas exploration use air guns that create pulses of sound every few seconds for weeks at a time, acoustic bombardment that masks whale communication across hundreds of miles. Christopher Clark calculated that in the pre-industrial ocean, a fin whale calling from Bermuda could be heard by another fin whale near Ireland over 2,000 miles. Today, that same call barely travels 50 miles before it's drowned in ship noise. The acoustic range of these animals has shrunk by 95% in a single human lifetime. It's as if we suddenly couldn't hear each other beyond shouting distance, as if our phones only worked across a single city block, yet whales are adapting. They're singing louder, pushing their voices harder to be heard over the din. They're shifting frequencies, moving their calls away from the bands dominated by ship engines. Humpbacks in areas with heavy boat traffic have shortened their songs, focusing on the parts most important for mate attraction. Right whales have increased the amplitude of their calls by 14 decibels. Over 40 years, a dramatic shift in vocalization requiring physiological changes we're only beginning to understand. Some populations have developed new tactics entirely. Orcas near Seattle learn to time their calls between ferry passages, going silent when ships approach, then vocalizing in the brief quiet intervals. Beluga whales near the Arctic, where submarine traffic disrupted their traditional communication, now click and whistle primarily at night when military activity decreases. These are learned behaviors, cultural adaptations spreading through populations in real time, as whales invent solutions to problems that didn't exist for their grandparents. The most hopeful discovery, perhaps, is that whales continue to sing, despite the noise, despite the disruption. Despite the shrinking acoustic space and the confusion it must cause, they maintain their songs, pass them to their offspring, innovate and teach and remember. Humpback males still compose new verses each winter. Sperm whale grandmothers still teach their clan codas to great-grandcalves. Blue whales still call across oceans, even if the answers come from closer than they used to, even if the acoustic highways they evolved to use are now crowded with interference. Because the songs aren't optional, they're how whales find mates across thousands of miles of featureless ocean, how families stay together when they're separated, how grandmothers teach navigation routes to youngsters who must remember them for 80 years, how clans identify allies and avoid competitors. The songs are the infrastructure of whale society, the invisible threads that connect individuals into populations, populations into cultures, cultures into civilizations that span entire ocean basins. When you hear a whale song, and I encourage you to find recordings and listen, really listen, you're hearing something ancient and ongoing, a conversation that began long before humans evolved language and will, if we allow it, continue long after our words are forgotten. You're hearing proof that consciousness takes forms we can barely imagine, that intelligence can be so different from ours and yet produce something we immediately recognize as sophisticated, as meaningful, as worthy of wonder. The ocean is not silent. It never was. It's filled with voices speaking languages we're only beginning to understand, singing songs that circle the world, telling stories in dialects older than our oldest myths. And tomorrow we'll follow those voices deeper still, into the social world those songs maintain, into the societies beneath the surface where grandmothers teach, where families grieve, where cultures persist across generations, in ways that mirror our own, while remaining entirely, beautifully different. The conversation continues. The question is whether we'll quiet ourselves enough to hear it. For 39 years, Ken Balcomb has photographed every orca in the Salish Sea. He knows them individually, not as specimens in a database, but as personalities, as family members, as individuals whose lives he's followed from birth to death and sometimes beyond, to the grief of those left behind. He can identify them by the shape of their dorsal fins, by the unique pattern of their saddle patches, by scars accumulated over decades. And what he's documented is nothing less than a revelation. Whales don't just live in groups. They build societies as complex as our own. There's a whale named J2, though everyone who studied her called her Granny. When researchers first identified her in 1971, they estimated she was already 60 years old based on the wear on her teeth and the pattern of her skin. She led J-Pod, one of 3 orca families in the southern resident population, for over a century. Think about that. A century of leadership. 100 years of teaching daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters which salmon runs to follow, which beaches were safe for rubbing their skin against smooth pebbles, which whistles meant danger and which meant celebration. Granny died in 2016. She was approximately 105 years old. When she disappeared, her pod spent weeks searching, calling with sounds researchers had never heard before, whistles that seemed to express, and I choose this word carefully, distress. The pod's behavior changed. Their foraging success dropped. They stayed closer together than usual, as if drawing comfort from proximity. They were, by every measure scientists could apply, grieving. This wasn't an isolated case. Whale grief has been documented across species. In 2018, an orca named Tahlequah carried her dead calf for 17 days, pushing the small body through over 1,000 miles of ocean, refusing to let it sink, refusing to accept that her daughter was gone. The image of that mother, balancing her dead infant on her rostrum, travelled around the world. It was impossible to look at those photographs and not recognize something fundamentally familiar, the raw biological ache of loss that transcends species. Sperm whales gather around dying pod members. They support them at the bucking surface so they can breathe. When death comes, they don't immediately leave. They stay with the body, sometimes for days, swimming slowly around it in formation. Whether this is grief in the human sense, we cannot know with certainty, but it's clearly not indifference. These whales are responding to death with behaviors that serve no survival function, investing time and energy in individuals who can no longer contribute to the group's success. If that's not the foundation of what we call emotion, then what is it? The complexity goes deeper still. These aren't temporary associations that form and dissolve opportunistically. They're permanent family structures that persist across lifetimes. Orca pods are matriarchal, led by the oldest females, who maintain their position through accumulated knowledge rather than physical dominance. Male orcas never leave their mothers. They might travel temporarily to mate with females from other pods, but they always return. A 50-year-old male orca still swims with his 70-year-old mother, following her lead, feeding where she feeds, learning continuously from her decisions. This creates something extraordinary: multi-generational knowledge transfer. A grandmother orca who discovered a productive salmon run 60 years ago teaches that route to her daughters, who teach it to their daughters, who teach it to theirs. The knowledge compounds. By the time a whale reaches Granny's age, she carries a century of experience, which kelp beds are most productive in El Niño years, where to find seals when salmon runs fail, how to navigate shipping channels that didn't exist when she was young. She becomes a living library, and her pod's survival depends on her memory. Scientists discovered this by tracking individual whales across decades. There's a humpback named Salt, first identified in 1975 by the distinctive white pattern on her dorsal fin. Over 49 years, researchers have documented her returning to the exact same feeding grounds in Massachusetts Bay every summer. She's brought 14 calves to these waters, and those calves, now adults themselves, bring their own offspring to the same locations. The territory has become family property, knowledge inherited like a deed passed from mother to daughter. These are our feeding grounds. This is where we come when the capelins spawn. This underwater ridge is where the sand lance concentrate. This inheritance of knowledge creates something that can only be called culture. The word once seemed too human to apply to animals. Culture implied art, language, traditions consciously preserved and transmitted. But the more we studied whales, the more that definition seemed inadequate. Because what else would you call it when orcas in Norway hunt herring using completely different techniques than orcas in Argentina? When Norwegian orcas herd fish into tight balls using their tail flukes, stunning them with powerful strikes, while Argentine orcas intentionally beach themselves on shores to grab seal pups, then wriggle back into the water? These behaviors aren't instinctive. They're taught. Young orcas spend years learning from adults, practicing in shallow water where mistakes won't be fatal. Researchers watched a mother orca teaching her calf to beach hunt. She found a gently sloping shore and intentionally stranded herself in just a few inches of water, enough to demonstrate the technique, but shallow enough that if her calf tried and failed, it could still reach deeper water. The calf watched, then tried, failed. The mother demonstrated again. The calf tried again. Over weeks, the youngster learned to control its approach speed, angle, and the rolling motion needed to slide back into the sea. This is pedagogy. This is deliberate teaching of culturally specific knowledge that, if lost, might never be rediscovered. Sperm whales show similarly sophisticated cultural transmission. Matriarchs lead their families to feeding. Grounds, their own grandmothers, showed them 70 years earlier. These aren't random explorations. They're journeys to specific seamounts, particular deep trenches, locations that have reliably produced squid for generations. The grandmother dives 2,000 feet into darkness, clicks echoing off underwater mountains, and the family follows, learning the route, building mental maps that they'll maintain for their entire lives and pass to their own descendants. And while the matriarchs hunt, they babysit. Sperm whale calves can't dive deep. They lack the oxygen capacity. Their bodies aren't yet adapted to crushing pressure. So when mothers descend to feed, other females stay at the surface with the young. Sometimes it's aunts, sometimes grandmothers, sometimes unrelated females from the same clan. They form protective circles around the calves, defending them from orcas and sharks, keeping them together, occasionally nursing calves that aren't their own. It's daycare in the open ocean, cooperative child-rearing that frees mothers to hunt longer and deeper than they could if they had to surface every 20 minutes to check on their offspring. This cooperation extends beyond family groups. Humpback whales have been observed defending other species from predators. In 2009, biologist Robert Pittman watched a humpback rush to protect a seal from attacking orcas, rolling onto its back and cradling the seal on its chest until the orcas left. This has been documented over 60 times across multiple oceans, humpbacks intervening in orca hunts, targeting seals, sea lions, even other whale species. They gain nothing from this. The seal is not food. Humpbacks eat only small fish and krill. The intervention is dangerous. Orcas can injure or kill humpbacks, especially calves. Yet they do it anyway, responding to the distress calls of animals they'll never meet again, species they have no evolutionary relationship with. Why? We don't know. Perhaps it's misdirected maternal instinct. Perhaps it's learned behavior. Humpback calves are sometimes targeted by orcas, so any orca hunt triggers a protective response. Or perhaps, and this is speculation, but not unreasonable speculation, it's something like empathy, the recognition of suffering in another being and the impulse to intervene, even at personal cost. These whales play. Young humpbacks breach 70, 80 times in succession, launching their 30-ton bodies completely out of the water and crashing back in tremendous explosions of spray. There's no survival function to this. It doesn't help them feed or escape predators. They do it apparently for the joy of it, for the pure physical thrill. Spinner dolphins perform corkscrewing leaps that send them 15 feet skyward, rotating multiple times before hitting the surface. Orcas surf in waves alongside beaches. They bow ride in front of boats, positioning themselves in the pressure wave where they're pushed forward by the vessel's momentum, getting a free ride and possibly, who can say for certain, enjoying the speed. Even stranger, whales sometimes seem to seek out human interaction in ways that serve no purpose we can identify. In the kelp forests off California, grey whales approach kayakers and position themselves to be touched. They'll float motionless, eye above water, watching humans reach out to stroke their skin. What are they thinking? What do they want? Researchers can only speculate. Perhaps it's curiosity. These are intelligent animals encountering another intelligent species. Perhaps it's pleasurable, the touch might remove parasites or simply feel good. Perhaps it's something we don't have words for, a motivation that makes sense to a whale mind but remains opaque to ours. The evidence of intelligence accumulates in small moments. A humpback off Australia was observed fishing. She would swim beneath a flock of seabirds diving for fish, then burst upward with her mouth open, timing it so she'd catch both fish and birds. But she'd release the birds unharmed, keeping only the fish. She'd learned to use the birds as indicators of where fish were concentrated and developed a technique to exploit that knowledge. This wasn't instinct. It was problem-solving, tool use, treating the birds as unwitting collaborators in her hunting strategy. An orca in New Zealand learned that fishing boats discard portions of their catch. She began following trawlers, waiting at the stern for discards. But instead of simply eating what was thrown overboard, she started storing fish in her mouth, then releasing them near the boat's wake where gulls could see them. When birds dove for the fish, she'd catch the birds. She'd invented bait fishing, and then, because orcas learn from each other, her daughters learned the technique. It spread through the pod. What began as one whale's innovation became cultural knowledge, a hunting strategy passed from mother to daughter that none of them possessed genetically. These discoveries force us to reconsider what we mean by society. We tend to define it by its artifacts, cities, written language, technology. But if we define society by its function, the transmission of knowledge, the formation of stable groups, the establishment of cultural traditions, cooperation beyond immediate kin, then whales have built societies that predate ours by millions of years. They're not human societies, and they don't need to be. They're whale societies, shaped by ocean conditions and whale minds and evolutionary pressures we can barely imagine, and they're fragile. When a matriarch dies, decades of accumulated knowledge disappears. When a population shrinks, genetic diversity vanishes. But so does cultural diversity, hunting techniques forgotten, migration routes lost, dialects that took thousands of years to evolve, falling silent in a single generation. When we killed 90% of the world's whales, we didn't just reduce their numbers. We destroyed their libraries, erased their cultural heritage, severed the transmission of knowledge that had flowed unbroken from grandmother to granddaughter for longer than humans have used fire. Some of what was lost we can never recover, but some remarkably, miraculously persists. There are whales alive today who remember when their populations numbered in the hundreds of thousands instead of tens of thousands, who remember hunting grounds now silent, who carry songs that once echoed across ocean basins and now find fewer and fewer voices to answer them. They are living witnesses to catastrophe and survivors of near extinction, swimming encyclopedias of loss and adaptation, yet they continue teaching. A grandmother orca shows her granddaughter where the salmon run. A sperm whale mother introduces her calf to the feeding grounds her own mother showed her. A humpback brings her offspring to the bay, where she's fed every summer for 40 years. The societies persist, the knowledge flows, the traditions continue, generation to generation, in waters that have changed almost beyond recognition, but still, somehow, contain enough space and food and silence for whales to live, to teach, to remember. Tomorrow, we'll trace the arc of that near catastrophe, how humans transformed from hunters to guardians, how populations collapsed and then, against all odds, began to recover, how the species that nearly erased ocean giants became the ones fighting desperately to save them. It's a story of horror and hope, of damage almost irreversible and the patient, determined work of healing. It's a story that isn't finished, and it's ours to complete or abandon. The societies beneath the surface are still there, still teaching, still singing, still grieving and playing and hunting and raising their young in traditions older than our civilizations. The question is whether we'll allow them the space to continue. December 10th, 1946. On this single day, across the waters of Antarctica, whalers killed 30,000 blue whales. 30,000, the largest animals ever to exist, slaughtered at a rate of more than one per minute throughout the hunting season. Factory ships processed them around the clock, flensing blubber, boiling it for oil, discarding the remains. The ocean ran red, and nobody thought to stop until it was almost too late. This is where our story turns darkest, because for 200 years, humanity waged war against ocean giants with an efficiency and determination that nearly succeeded in making them extinct. It began with men in small boats, armed with hand harpoons, chasing whales that could easily destroy their vessels. It ended with explosive harpoons fired from diesel-powered ships, sonar to track fleeing whales, helicopters to spot them from above. We transformed whale hunting from dangerous adventure to industrial slaughter, and we very nearly won. The Yankee whalers of Nantucket started it in the 1700s, chasing right whales along the American coast. Right whales earned their name through grim logic. They were the right whales to hunt. They swam slowly. They floated when dead, their blubber-rich bodies providing natural buoyancy, and they came close to shore, making them accessible to small boats. By 1850, right whales in the Atlantic numbered fewer than 100 individuals, down from perhaps tens of thousands before hunting began. The species teetered on the edge of extinction, saved only because so few remained that hunting them became economically unviable. But whalers didn't stop. They simply moved on to other species. Sperm whales became the next target, hunted across the global ocean for the clear, waxy oil in their heads, spermaceti, which made the finest candles and lamp oil available. Herman Melville's Moby Dick, published in 1851, captured the obsessive nature of this hunt, though even Melville couldn't quite convey the scale. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, decades of voyages into Arctic waters, where crews sometimes became trapped in ice, their frozen bodies discovered years later, still gripping harpoons, still hunting even in death. Sperm whale oil lit America's cities before petroleum replaced it. It lubricated the Industrial Revolution's machinery. It was so valuable that whalers would pursue individual whales for days, following them through storms and across thousands of miles of open ocean. The whales fought back. They destroyed boats, killed crew members, even sank ships. The whaling vessel, Essex, was rammed and sunk by a sperm whale in 1820, inspiring Melville's White Whale. But courage and fury couldn't overcome harpoons and human persistence. By the early 1900s, whalers had developed explosive harpoons that detonated inside the whale, killing more quickly and allowing hunters to take species previously too fast to catch fin whales, sei whales, blue whales. They built factory ships that could process whales at sea, eliminating the need to return to port. The hunt became mechanized, industrialized, relentless. In 1931 alone, whalers killed 29,000 blue whales in Antarctic waters. In 1938, they killed 46,000. The numbers are so large, they become abstract, meaningless. So let me make it concrete. Imagine one blue whale, 100 feet long, weighing 200 tons, having lived perhaps 80 years, carrying a lifetime of memories, migration routes learned from its mother, feeding grounds it returns to each summer, songs it's refined over decades. Now multiply that individual death by 46,000. In 1 year, every year, the populations collapsed. Blue whales, which once numbered 360,000 worldwide, crashed to fewer than 1,000 by 1960. Fewer than 1,000 blue whales left in all the world's oceans. Humpbacks fell from 125,000 to 5,000. Right whales dropped to 300. Grey whales in the Atlantic went completely extinct. The last one killed sometime in the early 1700s, before we even understood they existed as a distinct species. Sperm whales, bowheads, fin whales. Every large whale species was driven to the edge of extinction, or beyond it. And then something remarkable happened. Humans changed. It didn't happen suddenly. There was no single moment of collective realization. But through the 1960s and 70s, a shift occurred in how we saw these animals. Perhaps it was the space race. Seeing Earth from orbit for the first time made us aware of our planet's fragility, its isolation in cosmic darkness. Perhaps it was the environmental movement, the growing understanding that we were destroying ecosystems faster than they could recover. But one event catalyzed the change more than any other. Roger Payne's album, Songs of the Humpback Whale, released in 1970, became the best-selling environmental album of all time. Millions of people heard whale songs for the first time. Not abstract calls or scientific recordings, but music, unmistakably music, performed by beings we'd been treating as nothing more than swimming oil deposits. The album played on radio stations between rock songs. It appeared on television specials. Suddenly, whales weren't resources. They were singers. They were conscious beings creating something beautiful, something that moved human listeners to tears, even though we couldn't understand the meaning. Paul Spong amplified this shift. Living with orcas in British Columbia, he demonstrated their intelligence rivaled great apes. He played music for them through underwater speakers, and they responded, vocalizing back in what seemed like attempts at communication. He showed they recognized individual humans, remembered people they'd met months before, appeared to form preferences and friendships. His research helped inspire the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, which banned the hunting of whales, dolphins, and seals in U.S. waters and prohibited the import of products made from marine mammals. But knowing whales were intelligent and convincing people to stop killing them were different challenges. The whaling industry was massive, employing hundreds of thousands of people, generating billions in revenue. Japan, Norway, Iceland, the Soviet Union, major whaling nations, had entire economies built around hunting these animals. They weren't going to stop simply because scientists said whales were smart. That's when activists got involved. In 1975, Greenpeace activists positioned small Zodiac boats between harpoons and whales in the waters off California. When whalers fired, they'd be shooting through humans to reach their targets. Television crews captured it, all activists risking their lives, blood spreading across blue water, whales thrashing in their death throes while people tried desperately to intervene. The footage was broadcast worldwide. Public opinion shifted overnight. People who'd never thought about whaling suddenly couldn't look away. Children cried seeing whale calves killed beside their mothers. Churches condemned the hunts. Celebrities joined protests. The movement grew from scientific concern to global outcry. Nations that had resisted protection measures for decades suddenly faced political pressure they couldn't ignore. In 1982, the International Whaling Commission voted to establish a global moratorium on commercial whaling to take effect in 1986. It shouldn't have worked. The whaling nations could have simply withdrawn from the commission, continued hunting without restrictions. Some did continue on smaller scales, claiming cultural exemptions or scientific research permits. But the social cost became too high. Being a whaling nation meant international criticism, trade complications, tourism boycotts, and surprisingly, many whalers themselves began to question the practice. Men who'd spent their lives hunting whales started reporting something that seemed impossible. The whales were changing how they behaved around boats. In San Ignacio Lagoon, Mexico, gray whales, the same species whalers once called devilfish for their fierce defense of calves, began approaching tourist boats in the 1970s. Not fleeing, not attacking, but actively seeking contact. Mothers brought their newborn calves to boats, lifting them toward humans reaching down to touch them. Ex-whalers, now working as whale-watching guides, would break down describing these encounters. The whales seemed to forgive them. Or at least, the whales no longer saw humans as threats. Was this forgiveness? That implies understanding, intention, choice, qualities we hesitate to attribute to animals. But something changed in whale behavior around humans, something that spread culturally through whale populations. Grey whales in San Ignacio teach their daughters to approach boats, a tradition now 4 generations strong. Humpbacks breach beside whale-watching vessels, seemingly showing off. Orcas bow-ride in front of tourist boats, behaviors they didn't exhibit when boats meant death. And slowly, impossibly, populations began recovering. Grey whales, down to perhaps 2,000 in the Pacific, increased to 26,000 today. Humpbacks grew from 5,000 to over 80,000. Even blue whales, which suffered the most catastrophic collapse, have climbed from fewer than 1,000 to perhaps 10 to 25,000. These aren't pre-whaling numbers, we may never reach those again. But they represent survival, the possibility of continuation, populations stable enough to maintain their cultural traditions and genetic diversity. The recovery wasn't uniform. Northern right whales, numbering around 360 individuals, have barely increased despite 50 years of protection. They swim slowly through shipping lanes along the east coast, and ship strikes kill several every year, enough to offset nearly all successful births. Southern resident orcas. The population Ken Balcomb has studied for decades declined from 98 individuals in 1995 to just 73 in 2018. Their primary food source, Chinook salmon, has collapsed due to dam construction and habitat destruction. Without salmon, the orcas starve. Protection from hunting isn't enough if we destroy what they hunt. But some nations demonstrated that recovery could be dramatic with genuine commitment. Iceland transformed from a whaling nation to a whale-watching destination. The same boats that once hunted minke whales now take tourists to see them. Coastal communities discovered giants are worth immensely more alive than dead. A living whale might be observed by thousands of tourists over its lifetime, each paying for boat trips, hotels, meals. The economic calculation reversed. That single whale generates millions in tourism revenue compared to tens of thousands from its processed body. Norway and Japan continue limited whaling under various exemptions, but the scale is incomparable to historical levels. Where once they killed thousands, now they kill hundreds. And even that is controversial. Domestically younger generations in these nations show little interest in whale meat, see whaling as an antiquated practice their grandparents participated in, but which holds no relevance to modern life. Former whaling communities now celebrate whales instead of killing them. Towns that built their entire economies around processing whale oil now host whale festivals, their museums displaying harpoons as historical artifacts, relics of a brutal past they've moved beyond. Children who grow up seeing whale-watching boats instead of whaling ships can't imagine why anyone would kill these animals. The cultural shift, once it began, accelerated beyond anything activists dreamed possible. This doesn't mean the threats have ended. Ship strikes kill hundreds of whales annually. Fishing gear entangles them, leading to slow deaths from starvation or drowning. Ocean noise disrupts their communication, their feeding, their migration. Climate change shifts prey distributions, forcing whales to travel farther to find food or abandon feeding grounds their families have used for generations. Pollution accumulates in their blubber PCBs, mercury, plastic microparticles damaging their health, reducing fertility, poisoning the milk mothers feed their calves. But the trajectory changed. We stopped actively destroying them and started actively protecting them. Marine sanctuaries were established in critical feeding and breeding grounds. Shipping lanes were rerouted around migration corridors. Fishing regulations were implemented to reduce entanglement. Scientists developed acoustic monitoring systems to detect whales near ship traffic, warning vessels to slow down or change course. None of these solutions are perfect. All of them help. Most remarkably, we learned it was possible to undo catastrophic damage. Species on the brink could recover if given protection and time. Ecosystems could heal. Cultural knowledge, even after tremendous loss, could be preserved and transmitted. The whales taught us this. They survived our worst. They adapted to our presence. And when we finally stopped killing them, they didn't disappear into the ocean depths, avoiding all contact with the species that nearly erased them. They approached us. They brought their calves to our boats. They seemed, impossibly, to offer a chance to begin again. Tomorrow, we'll dive deeper into the mysteries that remain, the behaviors we still don't understand, the abilities that continue to astound, the lives whales live in waters we cannot survive. We'll explore the darkness where the whales hunt squid the size of cars, the navigation that guides humpbacks across 3,000 miles of featureless ocean, the sleep patterns that defy everything we thought we knew about mammalian rest. We'll venture to the edge of our knowledge and peer beyond it, into depths we cannot fathom but which whales call home. The hunters became guardians. Now we must become worthy of their trust. In 2003, scientists attached cameras to sperm whales in the Gulf of Mexico, hoping to glimpse how these animals hunt in absolute darkness. What they captured seemed to belong to science fiction. The whales descended beyond 3,000 feet, where no sunlight penetrates, where pressure would crush a human instantly. And there, in blackness so complete it defies human experience, they produced clicks, focused beams of sound that scanned the water ahead like searchlights sweeping through darkness. When the sonar located prey giant squid, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds, the whales increased their click rate to hundreds per second, a buzzing sound researchers call the terminal click sequence, and then the clicks stopped. The video showed squid simply drifting, paralyzed, while the whale approached and consumed them without struggle. The squid weren't dead, they were stunned. The whales had weaponized sound, producing acoustic pulses powerful enough to disrupt the neural systems of their prey, stunning them into immobility. It's predation through pure sound, a hunting technique we didn't know existed in nature, employed by animals hunting in an environment we can barely access with our most sophisticated technology. This is where our understanding of whales still breaks down. We know what they do. We often don't know how, and we almost never know why. The more we study them, the more we discover behaviors that expand the boundaries of what we thought possible for any animal. Abilities that suggest consciousness and intelligence, operating in modes completely foreign to human experience. Consider the deepest dive ever recorded. In 2014, researchers tagged a Cuvier's beaked whale off the coast of California and watched as it descended 9,816 feet, nearly 2 miles straight down. It stayed submerged for 3 hours and 42 minutes. Read those numbers again. 9,816 feet. 3 hours and 42 minutes without breathing. The pressure at that depth exceeds 2 tons per square inch. Nuclear submarines can't dive that deep. The whale descended into darkness and pressure that would kill us in seconds, stayed there longer than a feature film, then surfaced and continued about its day as if nothing extraordinary had happened. How is this possible? The physiological adaptations astound even specialists. Beaked whales collapse their lungs on descent, forcing all air into rigid airways that won't rupture under pressure. Their muscles and organs store oxygen in myoglobin, a protein related to hemoglobin but far more efficient at oxygen retention. Their heart rate drops to 4 beats per minute, diverting blood only to essential organs. Their metabolism shifts into a state that borders on suspended animation, and somehow they avoid nitrogen narcosis, decompression sickness, oxygen, toxicity, all the dangers that limit human diving, even with technological assistance. They've evolved to thrive in an environment that represents the edge of where life can exist on Earth. Sperm whales dive almost as deep, routinely descending to 6,000 feet to hunt, but their echolocation system reveals sophistication that goes beyond simple prey detection. They can adjust the frequency, duration, and intensity of their clicks with remarkable precision. When hunting in darkness, they distinguish between squid species by the density of their flesh, identifying prey composition before they can see it. They can detect a fish the size of a baseball from 500 feet away. They create 3-dimensional acoustic images of their environment, seeing through sound with resolution that might exceed visual perception. The clicks themselves emerge from the spermaceti organ, a massive structure filled with waxy oil that fills up to 40% of the whale's head. This isn't just an echo chamber, it's a sophisticated acoustic lens. The whale can shape the oil's density by adjusting blood flow, changing the focal length of the sound beam, directing clicks with sniper-like precision, or broadening them to scan wide areas. Its biological sonar, more advanced than any technology humans have developed, controlled by neural processing we've barely begun to understand. Then there's navigation. Every year, humpback whales migrate from Alaska to Hawaii, 3,000 miles of open ocean with no landmarks, no visible guidance. They arrive at the exact same seamount year after year, accurate to within 1 mile. Hawaiian spinner dolphins, tracked with GPS transmitters, swim 50 miles offshore to feeding grounds in the middle of the night. navigate in complete darkness, and return to the exact same bay before dawn. Grey whales travel from Baja to Alaska and back, 12,000 miles round trip, following routes they learned from their mothers. The routes so precise that observers can predict when specific individuals will pass specific points along the coast, accurate to within a few days across journeys lasting months. How do they navigate with such precision? Theories abound, but certainty remains elusive. They might sense Earth's magnetic field, reading variations in magnetic intensity like we read maps. They might use underwater acoustic landmarks, seamounts, ridges, specific bottom topographies that create unique sound reflections. They might track water temperature, salinity, currents, environmental gradients that create invisible pathways through otherwise featureless ocean. Or they might use methods we haven't discovered yet, senses we don't possess, perception operating at scales or in modalities we can't directly observe. The magnetic sense theory gained support from a disturbing correlation. Mass strandings often occur during geomagnetic storms, periods when solar activity disrupts Earth's magnetic field. If whales navigate magnetically, these disruptions might confuse them, leading entire pods into shallow waters where they beach themselves. Yet this doesn't explain all strandings. Perfectly healthy whales beach together when magnetic fields are stable, when there's no acoustic disruption, when everything suggests they should simply swim back to deep water. The hypothesis that whales sometimes strand because social bonds are so strong that they follow sick or disoriented leaders, even to death, remains unproven but persistent. Whale sleep presents another mystery. Sperm whales sleep vertically. Researchers have found them hanging motionless in the water column, heads up or heads down, in groups of 5 or 6, all perfectly aligned like standing dominoes. They remain in this state for 10 to 15 minutes at a time, completely still, apparently oblivious to boats approaching within feet. During these periods, half their brain sleeps, while the other half maintains consciousness. Unihemispheric sleep, also seen in dolphins and some birds. This allows them to continue breathing consciously, to monitor for threats, to maintain position in the water column. But why vertical? The evolutionary pressure that produced this specific sleep posture remains unclear. Blue whales demonstrate the most efficient feeding of any large animal ever studied. When they lunge feed, they accelerate toward krill swarms, then brake dramatically as they open their mouths, using the water's resistance to slow their momentum while engulfing massive volumes of prey-filled water. Researchers calculated the energy efficiency at 90%, meaning 90% of the krill's caloric content becomes available to the whale after accounting for the energy spent catching them. No other large predator approaches this efficiency. Its feeding optimized to mathematical perfection, refined across millions of years of evolution into a technique that maximizes caloric return. Grey whale mothers achieve something equally extreme through opposite strategy. During their 7-month migration and breeding season, they don't feed at all. They survive on stored blubber while nursing calves that consume 50 gallons of milk daily. The mothers lose 40% of their body weight, pushing mammalian metabolism to its thermodynamic limits. They're essentially converting themselves into their offspring, transferring their body mass directly to the next generation. The physiological stress is so extreme that mothers need several years to recover before breeding again, yet the strategy succeeds. Grey whale calves are among the fastest growing mammals on Earth, gaining 200 pounds per day while nursing. Then there are the centenarians. Bowhead whales live over 200 years. We discovered this by finding stone harpoon points embedded in blubber of whales caught in the 21st century weapons last manufactured in the early 1800s. These whales survived harpoon strikes during the height of 19th century whaling, carried the wounds for a century and a half, and were still alive and healthy when modern researchers encountered them. Analysis of eye tissue, which grows throughout life and can be dated like tree rings, confirmed lifespans exceeding 200 years. What does a 200-year lifespan mean for a whale? It means individuals alive today remember when the ocean was quieter, when whale populations were larger, when their songs traveled farther. It means grandmothers that might teach great-great-great-grandcalves, knowledge transmission spanning centuries. It means memories that extend beyond human civilizations, individuals whose lives bridge the gap between the age of sail and the age of satellites, whose perspective encompasses transformations we can only read about in history books, but which they experienced directly. Consider what they've witnessed. A bowhead whale born in 1820 would have been hunted by whalers in wooden ships using hand harpoons. It would have watched its population collapse as hunting intensified. It would have survived through the era of explosive harpoons, factory ships, industrial whaling. It would have seen protection finally arrive in the late 20th century. It would have watched ship traffic increase, ocean noise grow, temperatures rise, all of this within a single whale's lifetime. What does such a being know? What memories persist in a brain that's been processing information for 2 centuries? We discovered something else equally profound: individual recognition across vast time periods. Beluga whales at Arctic research stations approach specific scientists after decade-long absences, remembered across years of separation. They show no such familiarity with new researchers, only with individuals they encountered years before. The recognition is specific, personal, maintained across timescales that challenge our assumptions about animal memory. One humpback whale, identified by distinctive scars, was photographed helping a human diver. Jason James was working to remove fishing net from a humpback that had become entangled. Over 12 hours, he cut away 840 pounds of net, while the whale remained calm, occasionally rolling to expose different sections. After the whale was freed, it approached James's boat repeatedly over the following 12 years, exclusively seeking out his vessel among dozens operating in the area. The whale seemed to recognize its rescuer, returning to him specifically. Was this gratitude, memory, something else entirely? We can't know for certain, but the behavior suggests individual recognition and perhaps emotion spanning more than a decade. Drone technology has revealed behaviors impossible to observe from boats. Humpback bubble net feeding, filmed from above, shows geometric precision that astounds even mathematicians. The whales create spirals exactly 47 feet in diameter. They release bubbles at calculated intervals, creating cylindrical walls that rise through the water column. The spacing is too consistent to be accidental. The whales are controlling their bubble release with remarkable accuracy, constructing traps with the precision of engineers working from blueprints. We've also discovered that whale watching affects humans in measurable ways. Brain scans of people observing whales show activation in regions associated with transcendence, or self-transcendent experiences, the same areas that activate during meditation, religious experiences, profound encounters with nature or art. Heart rate variability increases, indicating parasympathetic nervous system activation. Cortisol levels drop. People report these encounters as transformative, life-changing, experiences that shifted their perspective on their place in the natural world. Perhaps this shouldn't surprise us. We're encountering beings that dwarf us physically, that possess abilities we don't have, that live lives we can barely imagine in an environment we cannot survive. We're meeting consciousness shaped by completely different evolutionary pressures, minds that might be as sophisticated as ours, but organized according to entirely different principles. The experience challenges our implicit assumption that human consciousness represents the pinnacle of mental evolution. It forces us to recognize that intelligence and awareness can take forms we never predicted, can arise from brains structured completely differently from ours, can produce behaviors and abilities that seem impossible yet exist. But for all we've discovered, vast unknowns remain. We don't know why whales breach. We don't know what they dream about during their vertical sleeps. We don't fully understand how they navigate, how their acoustic cultures evolve, what information their songs encode, whether they have concepts analogous to names, places, time. We don't know if they recognize themselves as individuals, or if their sense of self extends to their pod, their clan, their species. We don't know what it's like to experience the world through echolocation, to hear in frequencies that span 5 octaves beyond human range, to perceive pressure changes through mechanoreceptors embedded in skin. Every answer generates new questions. Every mystery we solve reveals deeper mysteries beneath it. The whales remain, fundamentally, unknowable, not because we lack tools or dedication, but because consciousness itself might be irreducibly subjective. We can measure brain activity, document behavior, analyze vocalizations, but we can never fully know what it's like to be a whale, to think whale thoughts, to experience whale emotions, to navigate whale relationships in whale societies built over millions of years of whale evolution. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some mysteries should remain mysteries, some depths should stay unfathomed. Not from ignorance, but from humility, recognition that the universe contains minds other than our own, experiences we can never fully access, perspectives that remain forever beyond our reach, even as we study and wonder and try to understand. Tomorrow, we'll explore the connections that bridge our species. Despite these differences, the extraordinary encounters where humans and whales meet, not as observer and subject, but as something more complex, more reciprocal, perhaps even as fellow conscious beings recognizing consciousness in each other. We'll trace moments when the boundary between human and whale blurred, when touching and being touched transcended species, when 2 forms of intelligence met across the gulf of millions of years of separate evolution and found, impossibly, of common ground. The depths remain, the mysteries persist, but in the darkness, something magnificent swims, more ancient than our civilizations, more sophisticated than we once imagined, carrying knowledge we're only beginning to glimpse. And they're still here, still diving, still hunting, still singing in frequencies we strain to hear, living lives we struggle to comprehend, existing as proof that Earth harbors wonders beyond our imagination, intelligence beyond our models, beauty beyond our capacity to fully grasp. The ocean keeps its secrets, but sometimes, rarely, it offers glimpses, and those glimpses change everything. When marine biologist Nan Hauser was pushed repeatedly by a 50,000-pound humpback whale in the waters off the Cook Islands in 2017, her first thought was that she would die. The whale was enormous, far larger than her, and it was being insistent, pushing her with its head, tucking her under its pectoral fin, lifting her toward the surface. She tried to swim away. The whale followed, continuing to manipulate her position with what seemed like urgent determination. And then she saw what the whale had seen, a 15-foot tiger shark circling closer, focused on her with predatory intent. The whale positioned itself between Hauser and the shark. It kept her close, protected beneath its massive fin, shielding her with its body. When the shark finally left, the whale released her and swam away. Hauser returned to her boat shaking, trying to process what had happened. A whale, an animal she'd studied for decades but never touched, had actively protected her from a predator. It gained nothing from this intervention. It risked injury from the shark, yet it acted, deliberately and persistently, to save a human being's life. This is where the relationship between humans and whales becomes something more than scientific observation, something that challenges our comfortable categories of subject and object, observer and observed. Because the more we interact with whales, the more they seem to interact back, not just tolerating our presence, but actively seeking us out, engaging with us in ways that suggest curiosity, recognition, perhaps even affection. In San Ignacio Lagoon, Baja California, Grey whale mothers have been approaching tourist boats since the 1970s. These are the same animals whalers call devilfish, because mothers would attack boats to protect their calves, sometimes killing entire crews. Yet today, mothers swim directly to tourist vessels and lift their newborn calves toward human hands. They position themselves alongside boats, floating calmly while people reach out to touch them, their massive eyes the size of grapefruits watching the humans who touch their babies. The mothers sometimes vocalize, low rumbles that vibrate through boat hulls, sounds whose meaning we can only guess at, but which feel like communication, like some form of acknowledgement passing between species. This behavior spreads culturally. Young females who experience these encounters as calves, protected by their mother's trust, grow up to become mothers who bring their own calves to boats. It's taught, passed from generation to generation, a tradition now 4 generations strong. The whales have created a cultural practice of seeking human contact, inverting the relationship that defined our species' interaction for centuries. Where once whales fled humans and humans pursued whales, now whales approach and humans wait in wonder for permission to connect. What are they thinking when they do this? We can't know. Perhaps it's curiosity. These are intelligent animals encountering another intelligent species, and intelligence tends toward curiosity about novelty. Perhaps touching feels good, removing whale lice and parasites that accumulate on their skin. Perhaps, and this is where speculation becomes unavoidable, they've somehow recognized that the humans in these small boats are different from the humans who once hunted them, that something has changed in how we approach them, and they're responding to that change with remarkable generosity. Bryant Austin dedicated years to photographing whale eyes at actual size. To do this, he had to swim within 6 feet of blue whales, close enough that his camera could capture every detail of an iris 3 feet across. The resulting images are extraordinary. You can see individual cells, you can see blood vessels, you can see reflections in the pupil, including, sometimes, reflections of Austin himself. A human face reflected in a whale's eye, both species looking at each other across the gap of vastly different evolutionary histories, but momentarily connected in mutual observation. Austin described the experience as transformative. The whales allowed him to approach. They adjusted their position to help him get the shot, moving slowly, carefully, as if aware of his presence and accommodating it. One blue whale floated motionless for 20 minutes while Austin photographed its eye, then swam away when he finished. These aren't anthropomorphic projections, they're documented behaviors that suggest awareness of human presence and possibly understanding of human intent. Beluga whales at Arctic research stations have demonstrated even more specific recognition. At one installation in Hudson Bay, researchers documented belugas approaching a specific scientist after he'd been absent for 11 years. The whales showed no special interest in new researchers or other familiar humans, only this one individual, recognized after more than a decade. They vocalized to him, came closer to him than to others, engaged in what appeared to be greeting behavior. The recognition was personal, specific, maintained across a time span that represents a significant portion of a beluga's life. Then there's the humpback that recognized. Its rescuer. Jason James spent 12 hours cutting 840 pounds of fishing net from an entangled whale off the coast of California. The work was dangerous. The whale could have killed him accidentally with a single thrash. But the animal remained calm, occasionally rolling to expose different sections of the net, behavior that seemed almost cooperative. After James finished, and the whale swam free, he expected never to see it again. Humpbacks don't stay in one location, they migrate thousands of miles. Yet for 12 years afterward, that whale, identifiable by distinctive markings, repeatedly approached James's boat specifically. Not other boats in the area, of which there were dozens. James's boat. The whale would surface beside it, sometimes spy-hopping to look at the people aboard, sometimes rolling to expose its belly behavior that in whale society often indicates trust or relaxation. Researchers documented this across multiple encounters. The recognition was consistent and specific. The whale remembered its rescuer and sought him out repeatedly over more than a decade. Was this gratitude? The word implies emotional states we're reluctant to attribute to animals. But what else would you call it? The whale gained no material benefit from approaching that specific boat. It wasn't being fed. James never offered food. It wasn't receiving touch. The encounters were brief and hands-off. The only explanation that fits the pattern is that the whale recognized James, remembered what he'd done, and chose to seek him out repeatedly over years. If that's not a form of gratitude, or at least positive association with a specific individual who provided help, then we need a new word for what it is. Technological advances have revealed connections we couldn't have imagined. Drone footage shows humpback bubble net feeding from above, revealing that whales sometimes adjust their technique based on fish behavior, modifying spiral patterns in real time, adapting their strategy within individual hunts. The implications are profound. These aren't merely instinctive behaviors, but flexible problem-solving. Whales thinking through tactical adjustments on the fly, responding to dynamic conditions with creativity and intelligence. More startling, drones captured mother humpbacks teaching calves specific feeding techniques. The mothers demonstrate, then watch as calves attempt to replicate the behavior, then demonstrate again, refining the lesson over multiple trials. It's pedagogy, deliberate instruction across generations, older whales actively transferring knowledge to younger ones through patient demonstration and practice. The teaching isn't limited to feeding. Mother orcas have been filmed showing calves how to approach seal rookeries, how to use kelp forests for cover, how to breach stun salmon, skills that require years to master and which vary by population, cultural knowledge that defines each clan's hunting identity. Human-whale connections have generated measurable economic transformation. Whale watching now generates over $13 billion annually worldwide. Coastal communities from Baja to Norway have rebuilt their economies around living whales, employing thousands of people as boat operators, guides, scientists, educators. Towns that once processed whale oil now process tourists, and the economic return vastly exceeds what whaling ever provided. A single whale, observed repeatedly over its lifetime by thousands of tourists, generates revenue that makes its dead body's value seem negligible by comparison. But the connection goes beyond economics. People describe whale encounters in spiritual terms. They cry. They report shifts in perspective, renewed sense of meaning, connection to something larger than themselves. Psychologists studying these responses find consistent patterns. Decreased anxiety, increased prosocial behavior, greater environmental concern, enhanced sense of connectedness to nature. The encounters seem to satisfy some deep psychological need, filling a void many people didn't know they had, until a whale surfaced beside their boat and looked back at them with eyes that held or seemed to hold recognition, awareness, perhaps even curiosity about these strange primates who'd learned to build boats and venture onto the whale's territory. The whales, meanwhile, continue surprising us. In 2018, a humpback was filmed carrying a seal on its belly to protect it from orcas, not for minutes, but for hours. The whale supporting the exhausted seal at the surface, fending off repeated attacks, expending tremendous energy to defend an animal it had no relationship with, that it would never see again, that provided no benefit whatsoever to its survival or reproductive success. When the orcas finally abandoned the hunt, the whale released the seal unharmed and swam away. Pure altruism across species, behavior that makes sense only if we accept that whales might care about suffering even in animals that aren't their own kind. Scientists are beginning to decode whale language using artificial intelligence. Computer algorithms analyze thousands of hours of recordings, identifying patterns in vocalizations, correlations between sounds and behaviors, possible syntax rules that govern how calls can be combined. Early results suggest humpback songs have grammatical structure rules about which sounds can follow which other sounds, hierarchies of phrases that build into themes. Sperm whale coders show similar organization, click patterns that combine according to consistent rules, suggesting not just communication but language with syntax, semantics, potentially even abstract concepts encoded in sound. If this research succeeds, if we crack the code of whale language, the implications are staggering. We might be able to communicate with another species, to exchange information across the gulf of separate evolution, to ask questions and receive answers, to establish dialogue between human and non-human intelligence for the first time in history. What would we ask them? What would they ask us? What could two forms of consciousness, shaped by completely different environments and evolutionary pressures, possibly say to each other? Perhaps the conversation has already begun. Perhaps those grey whale mothers bringing calves to boats are trying to tell us something. Perhaps the humpback protecting Nanhauser was communicating trust, alliance, to recognition that humans are no longer enemies. Perhaps every breach beside a whale-watching boat, every eye that watches us from the water's surface, every vocalization produced in our presence is an attempt at connection, whales reaching across the species boundary with whatever means they have available, seeking the same thing we seek when we board boats and scan horizons, hoping for a glimpse of their flukes. Contact, recognition, connection with consciousness other than our own. These encounters change people. Talk to anyone who's touched a grey whale in San Ignacio Lagoon. Read accounts from researchers who've spent decades following individual whales, watching them age, watching them teach their young, watching them die. Listen to ship captains who've altered course to avoid whales, taking financial losses to protect animals they've come to think of not as obstacles but as fellow ocean travelers. The boundary between observer and observed breaks down. The scientific distance collapses. What remains is relationship imperfect, asymmetric, fraught with all the complications of vast differences in size and ability and environment, but relationship nonetheless. We are not separate from whales. We share oceans. We share ancestors in the deep evolutionary past. We share planet Earth and the fates that climate change and ocean pollution will impose on all life. When a whale dies from plastic in its stomach, we are diminished. When populations recover, we are enhanced. Their survival is entangled with our survival, not because we need whale oil or whale meat, but because we need wonder. We need proof that intelligence takes multiple forms. We need reminders that Earth harbors mysteries and magnificence beyond human achievement. The connections we're building now, however tentative, however one-sided they sometimes seem, represent something unprecedented in human history. We are learning to coexist with other large-brained, long-lived, socially complex beings in ways that don't involve domination or exploitation. We are learning to appreciate consciousness that isn't human, while recognizing it as worthy of moral consideration. We are learning that intelligence and awareness can be profoundly different from ours, while still being in some fundamental sense equivalent in value. Tomorrow we'll look toward the future, the challenges that remain, the threats that persist, but also the possibilities for recovery, adaptation, and coexistence. We'll explore how whales are adapting to changing oceans, how humans are changing to protect them, how the relationship between our species might evolve as both our civilizations face transformations. Neither of us chose, but both of us must navigate. We'll ask whether the connections we're building now will be strong enough to carry us through the turbulent decades ahead, whether the trust whales are offering will survive the tests climate change will impose, whether the story of human and whale can have an ending that doesn't involve loss but rather continuation, evolution, mutual survival into an uncertain future, the connections exist. The question is whether we'll honor them, whether we'll prove worthy of the trust that grey whale mothers show when they bring their most precious treasures, their newborn calves, within reach of the species that nearly destroyed them. Whether we'll respond to their openness with protection, with restraint, with the wisdom to recognize that some relationships transcend utility and exist simply because consciousness recognizes consciousness, intelligence honors intelligence, and life, in all its forms, calls out to life, seeking connection across whatever boundaries separate us, building bridges one encounter at a time, slowly, carefully, hopefully constructing a future where both species thrive, where oceans remain rich enough to support giants, where songs still circle the world, and calves still learn from grandmothers, and humans still stand on boats holding their breath as a whale surfaces close enough to touch, close enough to look into eyes that have seen wonders we can barely imagine, close enough to feel, just for a moment, less alone in the vastness of existence. By 2070, ocean temperatures will rise 4 degrees Celsius. The currents that have circulated for millennia will shift. Krill populations will migrate toward the poles, following the cold water they require. And blue whales, the largest animals ever to exist, are already adapting. They're following the krill north, teaching their calves new migration routes that may sustain their species for centuries beyond our own civilization. They're demonstrating something we desperately need to learn. Adaptation is possible, even in the face of catastrophic change, if we act with sufficient wisdom and speed. This is where our story culminates, not in easy answers or comfortable certainties, but in the tension between threat and possibility, loss and recovery, the damage we've done and the healing that remains possible if we choose it. The future is not written. The ending of the whale story, and our story, remains open. What we do in the next few decades will determine whether ocean giants continue their ancient songs or fall silent forever. Let's begin with mathematics, because numbers offer hope when emotions overwhelm. Humpback whale populations, when protected, recover at approximately 7% annually. 7% doesn't sound dramatic. But compounded over time and watch what happens. Populations double every decade, from 5,000 in 1966 to 10,000 in 1976, 20,000 in 1986, 40,000 by 1996. Today, 80,000 humpbacks swim in waters that nearly lost them entirely. This is what protection achieves, not immediate restoration, but steady, persistent growth that accumulates into transformation. Grey whales tell a similar story. From perhaps 2,000 individuals in the Pacific when hunting finally stopped, they've grown to 26,000. The Atlantic population remains extinct. We killed them all before we understood what we were doing. But in the Pacific, grey whales have recovered so successfully that they've been removed from the endangered species list. They're not at pre-whaling numbers, may never reach them, but they're stable, increasing, teaching their daughters to approach boats, demonstrating that species can survive near extinction if we stop killing them and give them time. Even blue whales, which suffered the most catastrophic collapse of any large animal in history, show signs of recovery. From fewer than 1,000 individuals in the 1970s to perhaps 10 to 25,000 today, these numbers remain uncertain. Blue whales are difficult to count, spending most of their lives in open ocean far from observation, but every survey shows increase. Every population assessment trends upward. The mathematics of recovery are working, slowly but measurably, because we stopped the industrial slaughter and the whales, impossibly, survived long enough for protection to matter. This recovery didn't happen through hope alone. It required technological innovation and international cooperation. Ships now carry thermal imaging systems that detect whales 3 miles away, even in darkness, even in fog. Computer algorithms analyze the thermal signatures, predict surfacing locations based on dive patterns, and alert captains to slow down or alter course. In shipping lanes where these systems are deployed, collisions have dropped by 90%. 90% fewer whales killed simply because we gave ship captains the information they needed to avoid them. Acoustic monitoring systems serve similar functions. Hydrophone networks detect whale vocalizations in real time, identifying species by their calls, tracking their movements through shipping channels and fishing zones. When whales are detected approaching busy areas, automatic alerts go to vessels in the region, warning them to reduce speed and increase vigilance. The technology isn't perfect. Whales still die from ship strikes, still become entangled in fishing gear, but deaths have decreased substantially in areas where monitoring is deployed. The trajectory is right. The solutions exist. We simply need to implement them more widely, fund them adequately, enforce them consistently. Fishing industries are adapting too. Ropeless fishing gear, which uses acoustic releases instead of vertical lines that whales can become entangled in, is being tested in lobster and crab fisheries worldwide. The gear sits on the ocean floor without surface markers. When fishermen want to retrieve it, they send an acoustic signal that triggers a release mechanism, and the trap floats to the surface on buoyant bags. No vertical lines means nothing for whales to swim into, nothing to wrap around their flippers or tails, nothing to slowly starve them as they drag fishing equipment across thousands of miles. The technology works. It's more expensive than traditional gear, requires training, involves risks if the release mechanism fails, but several fisheries have successfully transitioned, proving it's viable at commercial scale. As whale populations increase, interactions with fishing gear will increase proportionally, unless we change our methods. Ropeless gear offers a path forward, where fishing and whales can coexist, where neither has to disappear for the other to survive. More remarkably, we're discovering that protecting whales benefits ecosystems far beyond the whales themselves. Each blue whale consumes 4 tons of krill daily during feeding season. That krill consumption is matched by krill defecation, iron-rich waste that fertilizes phytoplankton blooms spanning hundreds of square miles. These microscopic plants produce more oxygen than Amazon rainforests, form the base of marine food webs, support fish populations that human communities depend on. Kill the whales. And you don't just lose whales, you lose the fertilization system that maintains ocean productivity. Protect the whales, and you protect entire ecosystems from the microscopic to the immense. The carbon calculations are even more striking. Living whales sequester approximately 33 tons of carbon dioxide across their lifetimes, storing it in their massive bodies. When they die natural deaths and sink to the ocean floor, an event called a whale fall, that carbon is transported to deep ocean storage where it remains for centuries, perhaps millennia, restore whale populations to historical levels, and they could remove 400 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere, annually equivalent to 4 billion trees, equivalent to eliminating emissions from entire countries. This reframes whale conservation entirely. We're not just protecting charismatic megafauna because they're beautiful or intelligent or culturally significant, though they're all of those things. We're protecting critical ecosystem engineers whose presence maintains ocean health, supports commercial fisheries, and mitigates climate change. The economic argument for whale protection vastly exceeds the old economic argument for whale hunting. Living whales are worth exponentially more than dead ones, not just in tourism revenue but in ecosystem services that benefit everyone. Yet threats persist and, in some cases, intensify. Ship traffic continues, increasing. Global shipping volume has tripled in the past 30 years, and projections suggest it will triple again by 2050. More ships mean more noise, more collisions, more disruption to migration routes and feeding grounds. Climate change is already forcing whales to adapt in real time. Prey species are shifting distributions. Traditional feeding grounds are becoming less productive. Temperature changes are affecting the timing of life cycles, creating mismatches where whales arrive at feeding areas but find the krill bloom occurred weeks earlier. Whales are adapting. They're learning ship schedules and timing their surface breathing between ferry passages. They're developing new feeding techniques as traditional prey disappears. Humpbacks in Alaska have been observed feeding on different fish species than their mothers taught them, inventing techniques on the fly. Populations are shifting ranges, expanding into waters they haven't occupied in generations, following food sources into new territories. Their acoustic communication is evolving as ocean noise increases, whales singing louder, adjusting frequencies, modifying call structures to be heard through the cacophony. But adaptation has limits. If ocean temperatures rise too fast, if prey populations collapse too completely, if noise pollution becomes too intense, even the most flexible species will fail to keep pace. We're asking whales to adapt to changes that occurred over decades when their natural adaptation operates over millennia. Some will manage, some won't. The question is whether we'll slow the rate of change enough for adaptation to work, whether we'll preserve sufficient habitat and prey populations to support recovery, whether we'll reduce anthropogenic stresses enough that whales can focus on surviving climate change rather than simultaneously battling ships, noise, pollution, and entanglement. International in mares. Cooperation offers reasons for optimism. Shipping lanes have been redesigned around whale migration routes in several critical areas off California, around the Mediterranean, through the Bay of Fundy. These changes required coordination between multiple nations, acceptance of economic costs from longer routes, and political will to prioritize conservation over convenience. Yet they happened. Nations agreed to protect waters they don't own because whales recognize no borders, because effective conservation requires cooperation, because the alternative, watching whale populations collapse while each nation blamed others, was unacceptable. Marine protected areas have expanded dramatically. Currently, about 8% of the world's oceans are designated protected areas, and international agreements aim to protect 30% by 2030. These aren't paper parks. Many include robust enforcement, restrictions on fishing and shipping, funding for monitoring and research. In protected areas, whale populations often recover faster, exhibit less stress, show higher reproductive success. The model works. We simply need to implement it more widely, enforce it more consistently, fund it more adequately. Some nations are going further still. New Zealand granted legal personhood to a river, recognizing it as an entity with rights independent of human use. Similar frameworks are being considered for oceans, for whale populations, for ecosystems as wholes. If whales have legal standing, if someone can sue on behalf of a whale population harmed by shipping noise or habitat destruction, conservation becomes embedded in legal systems rather than dependent on political will. The concept seems radical until you consider that corporations have legal personhood. If a shipping company can own rights, why not an orcapod? Why not an ecosystem? The most fascinating development is in communication. Artificial intelligence is beginning to decode whale language, identifying patterns that suggest grammar, syntax, possibly even abstract concepts. Researchers are building databases of thousands of hours of vocalizations, correlating them with observed behaviors, using machine learning to identify relationships between sounds and meanings. The work is preliminary. We're nowhere near conversational fluency, but we're moving beyond simple classification of calls toward understanding what those calls mean, how they combine, what information they encode. Imagine the possibilities if this succeeds. We could warn whales away from shipping lanes by broadcasting danger signals in their own language. We could identify stressed populations by analyzing vocal patterns, intervening before populations collapse. We could potentially even establish dialogue, asking questions, receiving answers, exchanging information across the species boundary. What would we ask? What would they tell us about ocean conditions, about their history, about their experience of existence in an environment we can barely access? These advances don't erase the threats. Climate change continues accelerating. Ocean acidification is altering marine chemistry in ways we're only beginning to understand. Plastic pollution is accumulating in whale stomachs, microplastics entering food webs at every level. The challenges are immense, the risks are real, and the timeline for action is measured in years, not decades. But the trajectory has changed. We've moved from actively destroying whales to actively protecting them. We've developed technologies that reduce harm. We've established legal frameworks for conservation. We've built international cooperation where once there was competition for dwindling resources. We've transformed economically from valuing dead whales to valuing living ones. And perhaps most importantly, we've changed culturally. Young generations grow up seeing whales as worthy of protection rather than exploitation, as fellow beings rather than resources, as symbols of ocean health rather than commodities to extract. The whales themselves offer the most compelling reason for hope. They survived our worst. They persisted through industrial slaughter that should have erased them. They adapted to changes in ocean conditions we barely understand. And when we finally stopped killing them, when we offered the slightest opportunity for recovery, they took it. Populations grew. Cultural knowledge was transmitted. Songs continued evolving. Grandmother whales taught granddaughters routes through increasingly crowded, noisy, warm oceans, and the traditions persisted. They're still here, still diving into darkness we cannot penetrate, still singing songs that circle oceans, still teaching their young the accumulated wisdom of millennia, still approaching boats with what looks impossibly like trust, bringing their calves to be touched by the descendants of their hunters. They've offered us something we may not deserve, forgiveness, or at least the possibility of beginning again, of building a relationship based on respect rather than exploitation. The future that unfolds depends entirely on choices we make now. Will we redesign shipping to protect migration routes? Will we transition to fishing methods that don't kill whales? Will we reduce carbon emissions fast enough to prevent complete ecosystem collapse? Will we enforce protections strongly enough to matter? Will we fund research adequately? Will we listen when scientists say certain populations can't withstand additional stress? Will we choose long-term ocean health over short-term economic gain? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're immediate, practical decisions being made daily by policymakers, industry leaders, coastal communities, individual consumers. Every choice compounds. Every decision either contributes to recovery or undermines it. The whales can't speak at these meetings, can't vote, can't petition governments or boycott products. They can only continue, doing what they've done for millions of years, swimming through oceans they evolved to inhabit, raising their young, singing their songs, hoping the waters remain rich enough to support them. We are the variable. We are the species capable of destroying or protecting, of adapting quickly enough to prevent catastrophe or continuing toward collapse. The whales have done their part, they've survived, they've recovered where we've allowed it, they've demonstrated resilience beyond anything we could have predicted. Now it's our turn to prove we're capable of wisdom, restraint, foresight, the recognition that our survival and theirs are intertwined in ways that transcend economics or politics or national boundaries. Picture this. Imagine floating in warm waters on a moonless night. The ocean is dark, filled with bioluminescence that glows with every movement, billions of microscopic organisms producing light when disturbed, turning the sea into liquid stars. You're far from shore, beyond sight of land, suspended in water that extends 3 miles down beneath you and thousands of miles in every direction. And then you feel it, a low vibration that passes through your body, resonating in your chest, felt rather than heard. A blue whale is singing somewhere nearby, its call propagating through water, through your body, low frequencies that evolution designed to travel across oceans. The heartbeat of the largest animal ever to exist, 2 beats per minute, each pulse moving enough blood to fill a bathtub, rhythmic and slow and impossibly powerful. The whale surfaces close enough to see a dark shape against darker water, made visible only by the bioluminescence displaced by its movement, galaxies of light surrounding its form. Its eye, the size of a grapefruit, appears above the surface briefly, looking toward you. What does it see? What does it think? You'll never know. But for this moment, you're both here, both floating in the same ocean, under the same stars. Both breathing the same air, both alive simultaneously on this unlikely planet where consciousness emerged from matter and learned to contemplate itself. The whale dives, its flukes rise vertical, water streaming off in sheets of liquid light, and then it's gone, descending into depths you cannot follow, carrying on existence that predates yours by millions of years and might continue millions of years after humans are forgotten. You float alone again, but changed by the encounter, carrying the memory of connection across species, across evolutionary history, across the vast gulf of different experience, but momentarily bridged by mutual presence in the same space, the same time, the same ocean. This is what we're protecting. Not abstract populations or ecosystem services, though those matter. Not just tourism, revenue, or carbon sequestration, though those matter too. We're protecting the possibility of such encounters, the chance that future generations might float in dark waters and feel that vibration, might witness that eye looking back. We might experience the profound shift in perspective that comes from meeting consciousness so different from our own, yet unmistakably present, aware, engaged with the world in its own mysterious way. The whales are singing. They're still singing, still teaching, still diving, still surfacing, to breathe beneath skies that hold the same stars their ancestors swam under millions of years ago. Their songs carry across oceans toward dawn, rhythms older than human civilization, conversations that may continue long after our cities crumble, proof that Earth harbors wonders beyond human creation, intelligence beyond human models, beauty that requires no human audience to be complete, yet is somehow enriched when witnessed, honored, protected by the only species capable of destroying or preserving them. The choice is ours, the time is now, and the whales, patient as tides, ancient as oceans, continue swimming through waters that have held them since before we existed, waiting to see whether we'll prove wise enough to share the seas, whether we'll honor the trust they've somehow, impossibly, offered to the species that nearly erased them, whether we'll write an ending to this story that allows it to continue, generation after generation, grandmother whales teaching granddaughters routes through increasingly uncertain oceans, songs evolving year by year, populations growing slowly back toward abundance, life continuing its ancient work of adapting, surviving, thriving, against all odds in waters that remain deep enough, rich enough, quiet enough for giants to find their way. The ocean is singing, listen, and in listening, choose. Choose protection. Choose wisdom. Choose the future where whales and humans both thrive, where songs still circle the world and calves still learn from grandmothers and humans still stand on boats holding their breath as a whale surfaces close enough to touch, close enough to look into eyes that reflect back our own wonder, our own gratitude for the possibility of connection, our own hope that this remarkable conversation between species might continue into futures we can barely imagine, but which the whales, patient and persistent and impossibly still here, make possible simply by continuing to swim, to sing, to teach, to survive, to offer us the chance to be better than our history, wiser than our past, worthy of the trust that a grey whale mother shows when she lifts her newborn calf toward your reaching hand and waits, breathing softly, for you to touch the living proof that redemption is possible, that destruction can be reversed, that giants can forgive, and that the songs might never end if we choose, here and now, to let them continue. The whales are still here. The question is whether we will be, and whether, when future generations tell this story, they'll speak of the species that almost destroyed ocean giants, and then, at the last possible moment, chose to save to them instead. Chose to protect, chose to listen, chose to share the seas with consciousness other than our own, chose wonder over exploitation, wisdom over greed, long-term survival over short-term gain. Choose now. The whales are waiting. The ocean is listening. And tomorrow begins with whatever decision you make today, whether to contribute to protection or destruction, whether to add your voice to conservation or remain silent while others decide, whether to live as if oceans and whales and the ancient songs matter, or as if they're merely scenery in a human story that will end the same, whether giants swim or vanish, they're still singing. The songs continue, and every day we have the chance to ensure they'll still be singing tomorrow, next year, next century, carried across oceans by beings older than our civilizations, wiser than our technologies, more persistent than our politics, offering through their mere existence proof that Earth is richer, stranger, more magnificent than any world we could build, any story we could tell, any future we could imagine without them. The whales are swimming, let them continue, let the songs endure, let the grandmothers teach, let the connections deepen, let the trust grow. Let the future unfold with giants still breathing, still diving, still rising through dark waters toward light, still singing the ancient songs that circle the world and remind us always that we share this planet with wonders beyond our making, consciousness beyond our understanding, beauty that requires nothing from us except recognition, respect, and the wisdom to let it continue. The story continues. Write it well,